and made the opportunity for the Indianapolis market to advance our e-vehicle fleet. So he signed Executive Order 6 on December 12, and making us the first major city to pledge to convert the entire municipal non-police fleet to the alternative fleet vehicles. So we are moving forward with that. Next slide. So looking back, our fleet operations, our data was not solid. We always had a struggle with the line of business partners and their associates entering in data correctly. And we also have, and I'm sure many of you have, some challenges with old technologies. But with this partnership, we've been able to look at advancing our data gathering opportunities. Again, when you look at challenging 16 miles per gallon and going into EV, we're looking at how that's going to improve our overall performance as a city and reducing our hold on gasoline-powered engines. So we also wanted to look at how we can go into our fleet and look for better ways to estimate the size and need for the enterprise. And the data that's being provided to us is making that very helpful. If you want to go to the next slide. So if you look at what we have, we are the largest fleet ever now, looking to target 425 by 2016. We've already deployed, and as of March we had 113, and right now we're at 212, and we are saving just tens of thousands of gallons of gas. So we're really happy with what's going on here and how we've progressed our fleet initiative. So if you look at our overall deployment plan, again going to the 425 total, we're liking the Volts and the Fusion mix, and we're advancing our Leaf opportunity. And the Leafs are, the true electric vehicles, and we're starting to see where we may be able to advance those a little further as well. But so far the feedback from my direct staff and the use of the Volts has been very positive, and looking forward to completing the initiative. So when you look at the vehicles traveled over 400,000 or 400K through March, 47% of those on the electricity side, offsetting the 1,800 gallons of gas. So it's been really exciting for us to see this transition and to look at the opportunities going forward. And again, just attacking the fossil fuel dependency.
Yep, absolutely. And Manny, just to chime in here with a couple of points. One of the things that I think is really interesting to notice from this data, so you notice we've called out here 47% electric miles. If you look back on the previous page to this, I'm going to go ahead and go back one page now. You'll notice that a large percentage, in fact the vast majority of the electric vehicles that are being deployed are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Now the reason that is the case primarily is that range constraints is not an issue. Historically, the issue that people have seen when they deploy plug-in hybrid electric vehicles is if they're not monitored appropriately, what you'll find is that you get a very high share of gasoline miles on those vehicles. And so this program, through careful monitoring, a variety of different just programs that influence driver behaviors that we'll talk about a little later on, has achieved a really high share of electric miles in consideration of how many miles these are driving. On average across the fleet, at least as of this point, each one of these vehicles was on pace to drive about 14,000 miles per year. And for those of you who are really intimately familiar with electric vehicles in a municipal setting, that's a really high number. One of the classic issues that you see is that EVs are deployed into municipalities and put into low usage settings where the fuel savings just aren't sufficient to ever generate the savings that they make sense economically. And so it's been really critical that delivering a high share of electric miles has really been a big achievement of this program overall. Okay, so moving on from that, and just to drive this point home, so why is tracking and monitoring so critical for PHEVs? Some of you may have seen this article in Green Car Reports last summer, written by John Volker. They did some interesting analysis. They discovered a whole number of volts came off of lease from being used in a fleet setting. And they went through and they downloaded all of the lifetime fuel consumption data and operating metrics from those vehicles' onboard computers. And what they discovered is once you separate the driver from the cost of the fuel, it's very easy for them to just revert to muscle memory and fill up on gas. And so PHEVs are great in that they don't have the range constraints. You can use them into a lot of different settings, but it's got to be carefully paired with the right monitoring and measurement to make sure that those drivers are doing what they're supposed to and the vehicles are delivering the right savings. Okay, so moving on from that, we're not going to spend too much time on this, but just a case for change. So what is it that Indianapolis was trying to do? As Indianapolis kicked off this effort, Mayor Ballard signed this executive order back in December of 2012, pledging that they wanted to convert a large portion of their fleet over to electric vehicles. That started in earnest a very detailed wave of analysis, executed in collaboration by the city and then also Vision Fleet. And effectively what we did is we looked at each vehicle within the fleet one by one and looked for opportunities where exactly this relationship that you see right here on the right holds, which is if you pick a high mileage use case and just the right drive cycle, ultimately you can find cases where the higher purchase price of the electric vehicle is offset to a greater degree by the lower fuel costs. And this was really critical to this effort, is spending a lot of time up front being strategic about identifying the opportunities where the total cost of ownership is going to be lower by deploying electric vehicles. Now that relationship's not going to be a surprise to anybody on this call, but just double-clicking on that a little bit and talking about some of the philosophy that we followed in actually deploying that. So if you look at the total cost of ownership for a vehicle, including all those categories that we had on the previous page, and then you chart that against the number of miles per year that a sedan is driving, you get kind of a U-shaped curve that you see being formed by all of the dots on this chart on the current slide. Each one of those represents a specific vehicle and a representative municipal fleet, not actually Indianapolis's. And the philosophy that we've taken is that there's kind of three categories of vehicles that we can look at, and two of those we see as economical and being really good fits for swapping to an electric vehicle. The group number 3 is the most obvious one. Basically, that's where you can do a one-for-one swap and rely on the fact that the vehicles are driving enough miles that the fuel savings will be sufficient to cover the additional capital costs. And then group number 1 is the other one that, oddly enough, that we saw as economical, which is you have a lot of underutilized vehicles driving less than, say, 5,000 or 6,000 miles per year. And oftentimes there's opportunity to consolidate within individual departments, put in place car sharing and shared utilization, and basically move those. So if you were looking at it on a one-for-one basis, electric vehicles might not look cheaper. But when you can consolidate from 2 gasoline cars to 1 electric vehicle, the capital costs start to look, pretty good by comparison, and you can generate savings there. What we found more challenging is actually this group number 2 in the middle, which is you don't have quite enough miles that you're able to generate the fuel savings, but then similarly, or making it more difficult, is the fact that it's difficult to put that into a shared use setting because the driver is driving it enough that it's just difficult to put it into that use case. So with all that said, basically total cost of ownership mindset is the overarching philosophy that was used for this. Obviously, some priority was given to the environmental benefits as well, and this is kind of the strategy was followed. Lots of analysis done on the fleet before actually launching into this and starting to deploy the vehicles. Moving on from there. And by the way, feel free to type in questions within the chat window. We're happy to answer those as we go along. Okay, so now getting into the meat of the conversation, we wanted to spend some time talking about barriers to electric vehicle adoption and the solutions that Indianapolis has used. So first off, setting the context, fleets in theory should be a great fit for electric vehicles for a number of different reasons. Oftentimes they'll bring a total cost of ownership mindset, and so the analysis we just talked through makes sense to them. You'll often have greater route predictability, and so you can rely on the fact that you can manage the range constraint issue a little bit. For many fleets, you have at least some vehicles that are high utilization, and so you can generate the fuel savings. You've got central parking facilities and often low electricity rates. So all these things taken together, it seems like they'd be a great fit. But when you go and you look at the actual data, you find, and all of you can I'm sure attest this, fleets have actually been slower to adopt electric vehicles than consumers. In fact, if you look at the data for last year, our estimates are about 5 out of every 1,000 light-duty vehicles sold to fleets had some sort of plug, and that's about a half to 1/3 of what it is for consumers. So why is it? And the bottom line is there's a large number of constraints that hold back fleets today. So across the board, really, comprehensively, and this is why you don't see the adoption. We're going to touch on a few of these in a fair amount of detail, but just providing an overview of this. So one is uncertain operational savings. No matter how good of a business case is built, certain stakeholders and leaders in the organization are always going to have skepticism that those results are actually going to be achieved. For public fleets specifically, tax credit availability has been a challenge. And that's something that $7,500 off the capital cost of a vehicle can make a very big difference into whether it's going to be economical to convert or not. As any fleet manager can tell you, particularly within a public fleet setting, driver behaviors can be extremely problematic. You need to rely on them to be able to drive the vehicles appropriately, plug them in when they're supposed to, and all of that. And oftentimes there's concern they won't do that. And similarly, partially as a result of that, is fleet managers, department heads, whoever it might be, will have low confidence in service levels. Part of that is just based upon misperceptions or thinking that's based upon previous technology. Their understanding of the capabilities of the vehicle hasn't caught up to the actual capabilities of the vehicles today, but still it's something that needs to be overcome. A lot of public fleets just have limited electric vehicle experience, so this isn't a space that they've kind of dallied in very much, and so they're not quite sure where to start. And then moreover, they just don't have the bandwidth for new projects. Sustained budget cuts have left just about every city fleet across the U.S. in a tough spot. And so no matter how noble the effort, how good the opportunity, sometimes it can be tough to take on a change effort. Combining together with infrastructure and the need to put that infrastructure in place, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of planning, analysis, project management to get that all in place. And then obviously the higher upfront capital costs combined together with the lack of tax credit availability can be problematic. Okay, so now what we'd like to do, each one of these barriers that you see a star against, we'd like to talk a little bit about the approach that's been used in Indianapolis and share with you some of the things that are innovative about this. So first off, starting with deployment complexity and infrastructure. So a couple of the things that we took into account in Indianapolis, the project team has. So one is that the sites that have been selected for the electric vehicle deployment have been very carefully selected to basically make sure that the infrastructure is not going to present a problem there. You're not going to have major behind-the-meter upgrades that are going to be required. Generally speaking, the cost is going to be low. The second piece is, and this is something that I think has been really effective in terms of the partnership between Vision Fleet and the city, is taking a systems-level optimization view to this. And so for each one of the charging stations that the city and Vision Fleet are considering putting in, we're doing the math to basically say, does the cost of that charging station, will it deliver sufficient fuel savings in terms of a larger share of electric miles that is going to pay for itself or deliver a benefit that we want? The other thing that's really notable within Indianapolis is the use of existing charging infrastructure. So how do you make use of what already exists today? In the most notable way that we've been able to drive down the cost and reduce the amount of charging infrastructure that needs to be installed is making use of at-home charging just at level 1. Indianapolis has a very large number of assigned vehicles that are taken home by employees overnight. And the fleet is able to rely on those employees actually plugging in at home just through their existing, kind of the existing steel, so to speak. And they're able to charge up their Chevy Volts overnight, reliably doing that. And then the technology platform that we've combined this with, the telematics platform and all that, enables us to reimburse them down to the cent for all of the electricity that they consume when they're plugged in at home. I see we have a question. I'm going to come to that in just one second. But before I do that, though, Manny and Kelly, anything that you'd like to add or you think is important to note about the infrastructure strategy and solutions that we're using in Indianapolis?
Well, I can just a comment that that we are finding that the at-home charging has been very effective for my staff, particular. They have transitioned to that very well, and over the evening, when they wake up in the morning, they've got a fully charged battery and ready to take on the day. And then as they come into the office periodically, they may pull into one of our charging stations, get a couple-hour charge while they're doing paperwork in the office, and then go right back out into the field. So we're pretty happy with what's happening as far as getting the vehicles charged in a timely manner.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think you provided a good summary, Will and Manny. I would add that our infrastructure approach in Indy, as Will mentioned, is pretty unique and innovative, and I think it's proven to be working very well in that we're using the data obtained from the actual vehicles to drive the infrastructure decisions. So rather than spending a lot of capital up front to deploy charging stations where we think vehicles will need to charge, we're actually proving out that vehicles, in fact, would be able to charge here, and here's how many more electric miles could be achieved from having 5 charging stations at this parking location. So we're using that data to drive and to prove out the real need for those charging stations.
Yeah. And just driving home Kelly's point, if you look at what we have on the slides here, this is a map of all charging events through February of 2015. And the thing you'll notice here is that these charging events are distributed really around the entire city of Indianapolis. Blue represents level 1 charging. Orange represents level 2. And this shows you just, one, how extensively home charging is used. Effectively, each one of these blue dots allows us is home charging. And then the second piece is when you combine together basically the power of this GPS data for where the vehicles are traveling allows you to be much more intelligent about where you site that infrastructure. So that it isn't, it's convenient to the vehicles, it's placed in the optimal way, all of that. Okay, so coming to 2 of the questions. First, Richard had asked a question about can municipalities use leasing to get the tax credit? We're going to talk about that in just one second. Great question. But Paul asked a question about whether Indianapolis makes these fleet charging stations available to the general public. Given that we're on the topic of infrastructure, let's take that right now. So Paul, we'll get into this in a little bit, but the short answer is no, they do not. The reason being that the way that this is structured, Vision Fleet, it's basically, Vision Fleet is bearing all of the costs associated with purchasing the vehicles, paying for the fuel of the vehicles, whether it's gasoline or electricity, paying for the maintenance of vehicles. It's basically a total cost of ownership services contract, and we provide the vehicles to the fleet. Because we're paying for the infrastructure, we're going to put it in. One of the things we want to make sure is that every time a city driver has the opportunity to plug in, they're able to do so. And then the concern, even though it's a noble goal to have those charging stations available to the general public, is if they were made available to the general public, we would basically be losing electric miles, which are vastly cheaper for the city, if the public was able to use those, and that monopolized the station and made it so a person was unable to charge. Okay, so coming now, we'll get to Richard's questions on this one. So in terms of solutions that were adopted for the higher upfront capital costs and the lack of tax credit availability. So I started alluding to this. So the partnership between Vision Fleet and Indianapolis has been really important. Effectively, we're a private project partner. We actually purchase the vehicles, we own them, and then we effectively, through a services contract, which you can kind of think of it like a lease, but effectively it's a services contract because of all of the other stuff that's bundled together with it around advisory work, support, and all of that. We actually pass through the tax credits. So because us as a private partner, we're able to capture that and then pass it through, it results in lower rates to the city. Now this overcame, because we're actually financing the vehicles, it overcame the issue of, electric vehicles typically cost more money to purchase up front, or there may not be financing available for it, whatever it might be. We structured it so that the city of Indianapolis was able to catch up on a lot of these delayed replacements that had been resulting in low fuel efficiency, high maintenance costs, and all of that. And so basically get to basically replacing lots of the vehicles in a relatively short time frame. So hence why we're scaling up so relatively quickly. Now another thing that we did, and I alluded to this on a previous slide where we had all those dots, is basically charting total cost of ownership per mile and the vehicle miles traveled, is right sizing of the fleet. So this wasn't strictly one-for-one replacements. These vehicles are intended to replace roughly 530 old gasoline sedans, and we're replacing them with 425 electric vehicles. So roughly, figure 20% of the previous vehicles are basically being stripped out. And that has a great, if you look at it in the aggregate level, that basically reduces the disadvantage that electric vehicles are at from a capital cost standpoint, because if you're comparing the capital cost of 100 gasoline vehicles versus the capital cost of 80 electric vehicles, obviously, even though the electric vehicles are a little bit more expensive, that just makes it more manageable. And then the other thing along those same lines is basically right typing, what we call right typing. There's various terms that are used for this, which is oftentimes municipalities will have drivers that are in a full-size sedan when they really don't need to be. You'll have drivers who are in an SUV when they really don't need to be. And so aligning the vehicle's characteristics to the use case is really important, because you have, SUVs would be more expensive than a compact sedan or whatever it might be. And so by doing that, that also overcomes some of that capital cost disadvantage. Kelly and Manny, anything you want to contribute on this or add there that I missed?
I think you've covered it.
Okay. Good. Well, so just in terms of some of the inspiration that the City of Indianapolis and Vision Fleet took, when we were looking at that higher upfront capital cost, the lack of tax credit availability, really we drew inspiration from another market that faced some of these same issues, and that's the residential solar photovoltaic market. And if you look at where that market stood back in early 2009 or late 2008, it faced a lot of the same constraints that electric vehicles do today, which is you have a high upfront capital cost. People may have concerns around the performance of the vehicles, or in this case of the photovoltaic panels. And then tax credits may be slow to access or complex to file for. And if you look at what really opened up and unlocked the growth in that market, it's this third-party owned system model, like basically a power purchase agreement. And that's what the orange bar shown in this bar chart is all of those and what share of the market they've taken. And basically the reason that that's unlocked growth is that third parties coming in, they're putting up front, they're putting in the money so that you don't have the capital cost issues. They're pulling forward the savings so that the host knows that they save money from day one. They're guaranteeing the performance of the system, so they're basically saying, we will deliver or produce this much electricity at this cost, and you know, therefore, that you're going to save money. And effectively, those same concepts were used for the project that we have in Indianapolis. Okay, so building on that, so another one of the obstacles, uncertain operational savings. So a couple of the things or solutions that were adopted in Indianapolis. So one, prior to any vehicles being deployed, a lot of work was put into establishing a very rigorous total cost of ownership baseline for the vehicles that were going to be replaced. So looking through their fuel consumption, their mileage, their maintenance costs, all of that, and identifying the costliness of those vehicles. And then taking that data and basically structuring an electric vehicle deployment and the rates of this, and that includes the cars, the fuel, the maintenance, the telematics associated with it, all of that, so it's below that baseline rate. So in effect, we've established what it costs the city to operate previous gasoline vehicles, and we're able to structure the rates that of the electric vehicles to be below that. And so therefore you're providing, basically the savings between the two, and the city can rely on that. The other piece that's interesting is because Vision Fleet owns the vehicles and guarantees their performance, that can provide additional confidence around the operational savings. So basically, if there was a battery issue, if there were much higher than expected maintenance costs, all of those costs are basically borne by Vision Fleet, because we reimburse the city for maintenance services that are performed on the electric vehicles through the city's maintenance services or fleet services department. And so it basically de-risks this, so stakeholders or senior leaders can feel more comfortable going to this technology without having to worry about having a ton of unexpected maintenance costs later on. Another mechanism that we used is we introduced the concept of shared savings to this. And basically what it is within the agreement and the rates that we have for these vehicles is that Indianapolis, Vision Fleet basically cuts back a check to the city of Indianapolis as the vehicles are driven more efficiently. So if a larger share of electric miles is driven, if the vehicles, when they're driving on gas, drive a higher miles per gallon, or they drive a higher miles per kilowatt hour, all of those things result in payments from Vision Fleet back to the city, which reduces the rate. And that really helps to align incentives between the city and then Vision Fleet. So we're working together to reduce the overall cost of operating this. And then the final piece, and this is tremendously important, is detail tracking through telematics. So every one of the vehicles that we deploy in Indianapolis has an onboard telematics device that gathers a wealth of data that's basically tailored for electric vehicles. It's not just mileage, it's not just location. It has information on the state of charge of the battery, the charging events that it goes through. And when you take that data and you put it into a really robust analytics platform, that really allows you to have a high degree of confidence that you're getting the fuel savings that you anticipated and planned for. You can see if there's problematic driver behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. And so we'll double click on that in now just a moment. Before we do that, though, I see a question from Alice. Oh, go ahead, Kelly, please.
I was just going to add to the last two pieces of this, as Will highlighted, the shared savings mechanism. I think this is one of the coolest pieces of our contract with Indianapolis is that we are writing them a check every month when the vehicles beat certain performance targets. And we're tracking the vehicle performance in real time every day. And the city has access to all that data as well. So on any given day, you can log into Vision Fleet IQ and see, how many people in your fleet are consistently plugging in, how many people are really exceeding their targets by way of the total share of electric miles that they're driving. You can see if people are getting efficient driving, so efficient miles per gallon, miles per kilowatt hour. And so it's really a great system to not just track your fleet and understand how the vehicles are being utilized, but also to track your savings on a daily basis. And so that's a very rich aspect of our program here, and something that I think the fleet managers have grown to appreciate.
Yeah, good points. Thank you, Kelly. So I saw a question from Allison here. Did you develop your own tool to calculate the total cost of ownership? We did. So effectively, Vision Fleet and the city, through kind of collaborative analysis, arrived at some estimates of this. It's nothing revolutionary. It's the same concepts that are employed by many of the tools that you would see out there today. But this was tailored specifically for an electric vehicle context, and given how important it was to have an accurate view of projections of plug-in rates, fuel costs, all of that, I basically got to quite a bit more detail than some of what you might find available through, say, like a Clean Cities website today, or from the Department of Energy or something like that. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Hopefully we can kind of get through the rest of these slides in the next 10 minutes to leave 15 minutes for questions here at the end. Okay, so moving on to suboptimal driver behaviors, some of the tactics and solutions that we're taking in Indianapolis. So as the vehicles were deployed, one of the things we've been very careful to do is provide good upfront training for the drivers so that they understand the characteristics of the vehicles, how to use them to get the greatest benefit, where to plug in, all of that. And we found that that's delivered really, really great results. I mentioned the detailed monitoring through telematics. We have this information on the vehicles, which basically allows us to identify how good each driver is doing at plugging in, driving efficiently, all of that. And the existence of that data and the fact that department managers and drivers know that we have that data just, I guess, enforces a higher kind of level of honesty, or just once you know somebody's monitoring the data, you tend to get better results, and we've really seen that. And because that's complemented with real-time access to the data through a web interface by the fleet managers, it's much easier for problematic driver behaviors or issues with the usage of the vehicles to be spotted soon, almost immediately before they really become problematic. And it's not the case that many months after it starts becoming an issue, somebody tries to intervene. It's intervened and corrected early. Kelly, do you want to talk a little bit, because I think this stuff is really cool, and you're most close to it, is around the scorecards for driver efficiency and the incentives for higher efficiency and all the communications that go on in Indianapolis, and I guess what's going on now and what we need to be doing in the coming months and years?
Yeah, absolutely. So a part of this program, too, is because we're deploying clean and efficient vehicles and really replacing these old gas-guzzling sedans, we don't want the education around all the benefits for the city and all the savings to just be at the high level and, in the national press and things like that. We really want the drivers to understand how they can really drive and increase those savings. And so we wanted to get them involved at every level. A couple of things that we've done to ensure their involvement and to ensure their, buy-in to the idea that their behaviors can really affect the savings for the city is that we've, as Manny mentioned, ensured that all home charging is reimbursed to the penny. So each kilowatt hour that is spent at a driver's home is reimbursed as a non-taxable item on a monthly basis. And then we also have an incentive program that we worked with the Human Resources Department in the city of Indianapolis to deploy. So every month we grab the top performers in the fleet by way of the charging behavior. So if a driver plugs in at every opportunity, they had to plug in. So if they were parked near a charging station and plugged in, that increases their score. And so each month we give them a $20 gift card. That's the program we have deployed to date and for the last 6 months. It works well in that it gets people excited about the program. It helps people to understand why plugging in is so important. And we're also rolling out scorecards so that drivers can see, how they might be able to increase their driving efficiency, how they compare to other drivers in their fleet, and really what can be done to further increase those savings to the city. So these are areas that we're working with drivers to just, like I said, ensure buy-in and complete understanding of the program and all of its benefits. And it's really been met with positive feedback from the drivers. I think they enjoy knowing that they're not just driving a city asset, they're actually utilizing a city asset to drive savings. And so I think in that regard it's very beneficial for everyone involved.
Yep, great. And Manny, anything you want to add to that or chime in with?
Well, I think I think Kelly covered it, but it's for the employees, they really do feel a great part of this initiative, and their actions are showing it by the effective use of the charging stations and just their positive comments back to management on the use of the vehicles, and they really do enjoy driving a new car, and that's always a plus.
Yeah, that's true. Well, good. And then just to give a little bit of detail here, so what you see on the screen now is a snapshot of Vision Fleet IQ. So this is basically the analytics platform that each one of the department managers is able to see for the vehicles that are under their control. And basically it allows them to see, where do they stand in terms of utilization, getting towards the miles that those vehicles need to drive to generate savings. What sort of battery utilization are they getting? So how many battery packs are they using fully per day? Down below, you can see some of the individual vehicles are tracked here. And that enables the fleet manager to spot if there's problematic behaviors, somebody not plugging in, whatever it might be, and then to intervene. And this has been really great. So just basically having a platform that takes all this data around the pieces that are really critical to electric vehicle performance and distills it down into something that's easy to access for fleet managers and understand is critical. And Kelly alluded to this. If you look at the screen here on the right, which is basically the dashboard or the thumbnail for an individual car, a Nissan Leaf, and this is dummy data, by the way, is basically the hero score, which is it's an aggregation into a very simple score of a lot of complex metrics. It basically drives at how good of a job are they doing at plugging in when they have the opportunity to do so. And that allows us to rank the drivers. And then the efficiency score, so 3.2 out of 5 for this one. So, what sort of MPG are they getting, and what sort of miles per kilowatt hour are they getting? Are they driving with too much of a lead foot or whatever it might be? Good. And I'm just seeing here that we had some questions that we didn't get to. So Paul had asked for the incentives. Is it reimbursement and gift cards conferred on a non-taxable or a taxable basis? Kelly, do you know what the answer is to that one?
Yeah, the home reimbursements are not taxed. They're just put on people's paychecks once a month, and it is a non-tax item.
Yeah. And then what about gift cards?
Gift cards are also not taxed.
Got it. Okay. Good. Okay, so moving on from here, we're getting closer. So low confidence in service levels as another barrier. So if you have decision makers or leaders within your organization that don't have confidence that electric vehicles are going to be up for it, or drivers who don't have confidence that it's going to be up for it, what sort of steps can you take? And these are some of the steps that we're taking in Indianapolis. So one, the project started with a pilot up front, basically to validate the plans and to prove folks that the vehicles were up for the job. And so basically it started at a small number of vehicles initially to gather data, prove that they were getting the results that were expected. The second piece is as the vehicles were deployed, we had a number of driver focus groups, and we're staying very engaged with the drivers. And effectively, the drivers that the vehicles were deployed to initially, it was very strategic selection to try to identify drivers who are most likely to be good stewards with those vehicles and effectively become champions within this. And that's tremendously valuable in that if the first person that you have in a specific department who deploys one of these vehicles is really advocating and talking positively about it, that's super helpful to how everybody else who in the future gets an electric vehicle is going to feel about it. And so, engaging with them up front to ensure that they have a positive experience, they understand it, that they're going to be vocal about that was really critical. We've done upfits as required. So, for example, many of the vehicles or the Volts deployed to date that have gone into the administrative functions of the police department. And so, for example, putting in place a gun safe in the rear of the vehicle in which the service weapon can be deployed is, important to make sure that it meets the duty cycle. But this is something that we're continuing to work on an ongoing basis. And then just being responsive and flexible to resolving issues. Kelly, our local program manager there, does a fantastic job of, and Manny obviously, as well as, when concerns pop up or questions pop up, jumping on those very quickly to make sure that they're addressed in a timely manner. Okay, I see a question here. Will the slides, this is from Andrew, will the slides be available afterwards? Yes, they are going to be made available afterwards. I believe Gustavo, the Zero Emissions Map team, will be sharing a version of these within the next week. Okay, let's move on from here and then let's get to Q&A. So wrapping it all up, some of the learnings that we wanted to convey, if you think about everything that's happened in Indianapolis. So one, electric vehicles are new technology, and new technology requires a new approach. Procurement systems aren't optimized to be able to make it easy to deploy electric vehicles. Management approaches are not optimized to be able to manage electric vehicles within the existing system. And so if you try to bang your head against a wall, doing things exactly as they've been done for gasoline vehicles, unlikely that you're going to get the results that you want. Two is that partnerships can be really effective to achieving great things. Every city has a lot of constraints that it faces in trying to do things on its own. Public-private partnerships can play a role in achieving things on a scale and with a speed that would be difficult otherwise. As we talked about here, it's a comprehensive strategy is critical. You can't just drop electric vehicles in and cross your fingers and hope for success. Having means to ensure that they're delivering the fuel savings that are expected, if there's operational issues, that you're able to identify those early on and address them, that they're meeting the use cases, or the drive cycle needs and all of that. All of that needs to be addressed up front, and you got to have a comprehensive strategy. We've seen data and monitoring being really critical to delivering the expected value. I hope you've gotten a sense of some of the proof points from that. Getting a high share of electric miles, making sure that the vehicles are utilized really effectively. Driving 12,000, 14,000 miles per year. And then the other piece is so that the technology is proven, even if the market perception hasn't quite caught up to that. There's good what we'll call battle-tested EV options out there. Both the Leaf and the Volt have been in the market for a while now, and so there's good operational data on how they perform, the battery life, all of that. And so there's actually something that can be done reliably, and you have the data to prove that. And then the final point is just depending on the characteristics of your fleet or any public fleet. The financial benefits can be substantial when it's done right. It's got to be done right. And so choosing carefully the use cases to replace it, doing the analysis up front to establish a baseline of what it's costing from an environmental and a financial standpoint, and basically structuring the deployment so it addresses those is critical. So I'll stop there. Manny, is there anything else that you want to chime in terms of learnings that you think are important to summarize from the effort?
Well, I think when you look at the initial deployment, ensuring that you're working with your fleet operations as well as your line of business partners to determine the position need, we find that to be very helpful in the long run. So that time invested up front will be very helpful to you to selecting the right vehicle for the right use.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you, Will and Manny and Kelly. That was very good. We have about 11 minutes to open up for questions. I'm sure there's going to be a few from the group. I have myself quite a list. I don't think I will get to all of them today, but I hope to follow up with you guys and see if I can get some further thinking. This has been really good, really interesting. So good work. So Marcel, let's make sure that people are unmuted and they feel free to jump in any moment with questions, but also they can continue typing the questions in the box if that's better for them. So let me just shoot with my only question I think I'd like to get to today, Will, is on that first chart you show with the TCO per mile, what you call the U-shaped curve. And I was, you may know that we've been doing lots and lots of work on this ourselves. I just wonder, on that way of showing data on a per mile basis, I'm thinking that, of course, as you have the miles going to zero, you will have the TCO or whatever factor you have there going, really high. You divide something by a small number, you get a very large number. So I wonder, what was the approach you took to kind of construct that those estimates there?
So yeah, just to make sure I understand. So the question is basically why measure it on a total cost of ownership per mile basis?
Per mile, I'm just thinking. Maybe I'm sure I'm missing something here. But if you take the TCO and you divide that by a very small number, as you go to the left, you have very small miles. Naturally, you have a very large number. So I just wonder what is the concept behind this curve.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we do that, and there's a number of different reasons, but one of them is if we've had the opportunity to analyze a large number of public fleets around the U.S. from all different regions, is is a chronic problem that you see in municipal fleets is low utilization. And so, individual departments will over time effectively stockpile cars just because, kind of a just-in-case attitude. A driver or a fleet manager may say, well, I can't give you a raise this year, but I can give you a car, and it's kind of viewed as a perk. And utilization and low utilization is something that drives up costs really substantially. And if you look at total cost of ownership on a per-mile basis, it really helps drive home just how problematic that is. And so even if you may look at it on an aggregate basis, well, this vehicle is only costing that much, that doesn't seem that problematic. But when you place it in terms of what it's costing on a usage-adjusted basis, when you have these underutilized vehicles, you start to get a sense that it starts to drive home how much of a problem that is. Part of the strategy with Indianapolis is simultaneously, it's not just electrification. Electrification is the major aim, but then there's other pieces of this or aims that are basically folded into that. So one is just generally speaking fleet modernization. Anytime you replace an old vehicle with a new vehicle, you're going to have lower maintenance costs, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And the other piece is utilization. And so by looking at it on a total cost of ownership per mile basis, that flags some of the utilization issues, makes them more evident, and makes it so that you're managing the utilization piece more actively. And doing things like, taking some of the vehicles that are on an assigned one-for-one basis and putting them into a shared setting.
Okay.
The utilization is higher, and therefore the total cost of ownership per mile is higher. There's lower, I should say.
Thank you. Anybody, any question on the group? Feel free to jump in or type.
Yeah, so I see one question here. How many cities are using the services of Vision Fleet? At this point, our only active project is with the city of Indianapolis. We have a number of other cities that we're close to basically signing a partnership with and starting to do this. As I'm sure all of you can attest to who work in a public fleet setting, is that the purchasing process is slow and cumbersome. And so it's taken a lot of conversations to get to a point that we're basically now broadening this out to other cities that see the benefit for it and face many of these same constraints and have the same priorities as Indianapolis.
I have a question. On the contractual agreement, who has the responsibility for liability? Insurance liability seems to be a big issue in some localities.
Yeah, so basically the question being if an accident, if a driver of one of these vehicles gets in an accident, who pays for the cost of repairing that vehicle, the other vehicle, and any other costs associated with it?
Yeah, including liability in terms of a person's injuries.
Yeah, so Indianapolis is actually, and Manny and Kelly, feel free to correct me here and jump in, but Indianapolis is actually self-insured.
That is correct.
Yeah, the city itself actually basically is responsible for the cost of accidents, the cost of like any liability issues or anything like that. So effectively, it's no different than the existing gasoline vehicles.
So it's Kathy Kinsey. I'm sorry, but I can't actually get into the webinar for some reason from my home computer. But I'm curious. Have you considered possibly entering into agreements with states? I know you're working on the municipal level now, but do you envision this as being the kind of program that would do well on a statewide basis with state fleets?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's So just at a high level, yes, it works. It's fundamentally the same thing. State fleets can be a little bit unique in that, the type of drive cycles that you have may be a little bit different than a city. You may have, let's say, more infrequent trips that are of a higher mileage. Now, if you carefully select, you'll be able to identify the use cases where it makes sense. But if you have somebody who their main drive profile is 5 miles a day, 4 days a week, and then 200 miles 1 day a week, for a PHEV, it's difficult for it to deliver a high share of electric miles. Now that's a really extreme case. Most state vehicles aren't like that. But I guess in short, absolutely, working with states is definitely in our interest. We've actually had conversations with one or two of the governor's offices for states that you would kind of expect to be the typical suspects on this type of effort, given the multi-state ZEV MOU. And absolutely. I'd say the reason that we haven't made more of a priority of it is just, working with the city itself is fairly time-consuming, and working with the state, obviously it's potentially an even more cumbersome and time-consuming process, but absolutely. And to the extent that there are states that, where they're thinking about some of these same issues and trying to find solutions to them, of course, always happy to talk with them and share some of our own thinking.
That's great. I mean, I think this is fantastic. Cracking the fleet issue is a real challenge for those of us who are trying to electrify our transportation sector. So this has just been great. And one other real quick question. I'm interested to know, one of the data points I think that probably needs more development are the maintenance costs associated with electric vehicles. Not simply because they're new vehicles and you expect them to have lower maintenance costs in the early years, but have you been able to document the maintenance costs associated with these vehicles over a longer period of time?
Yeah, so let me go ahead and provide a brief answer, and then I'll hand it over to Kelly. So because we're in the first year of the basically, well, we're now into the second year, I suppose, but it was we're operating in pilot kind of status initially. We don't yet have over, say, like a 5-year or an 8-year time frame the maintenance costs. We expect that they're going to be lower than your average gasoline vehicles for reasons that are probably evident to everybody on this call, just fewer moving parts, less preventative periodic maintenance and all of that. I think those costs have been much lower thus far than the previous ones, and that's been a huge source of savings. Now, granted, we're only less than a year into the operation of most of the vehicles, so I think it would be difficult to paint any sort of statistically reliable conclusion based upon that. Kelly or Mandy, I don't know if you want to jump in and qualify that.
So the data supports that over the life of these vehicles, the maintenance costs will be lower than their internal combustion engine sedan that the city used to have. And the beauty of this program too is that since Vision Fleet takes all the risk and pays for all the normal wear and tear and preventative maintenance for these vehicles, the city really has the freedom to know each year what they need to budget for those normal wear and tear maintenance needs. And so those costs are known throughout the life of the contract. And because we also have the Vision Fleet IQ system in place, we're tracking every day the health of all the vehicles, making sure that they're taking it on time for preventative maintenance. And we're really monitoring the health pretty aggressively so that we can ensure that the vehicles are treated properly and receive the work and maintenance services that they need to, keep them healthy as long as they possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very good question, though. Yeah. Well, hey, I know we're coming up on time. Let me just look here to see if any other questions. So I don't see any other questions. I guess what I'd like to wrap here, and by the way, if you do have any other follow-up questions, we're happy to answer those. Feel free to funnel those through Gustavo or reach out to us directly. But I guess just in closing, what I'd like to say, just want to say from at least on the Vision Fleet side, a very big thank you and recognition to the city of Indianapolis. I think the city is doing a lot of very innovative things on this topic, and us on the Vision Fleet side, we've continued to be impressed with them, really value the opportunity to partner with them, and we think make some really transformative things happen in this space. And so just want to wrap on saying thank you to them. Gustavo, should we go ahead and I know we're right at
Thank you.